altering the interpretations that we have about ourselves and about the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, even for myself, I felt like when I was almost like I had gotten myself into this place too, where I was, what you were talking about with, pretending something didn't happen per se. Like when I was in that state of feeling alone, it was like I was creating this, I don't know, like I didn't want to face other things because I felt like because I had that truth so ingrained in me that it like you were talking about with the fractals, it went out in all these different areas that I never could have understood until I started doing this type of work. Like you might think something small and insignificant is, oh, it's just my personality or it's just the way I am. But in doing this and understanding more about myself, I can see, wait a minute, I'm this way because I have this belief, or I'm this way because of this, whatever happened that I've led myself to believe this story is true.
Yeah.
And what's amazing too is what Chris was saying is like, change your words, change your world, change the story that you're telling yourself, and your environment changes as a result. So as I mentioned, I had my boss told me I wasn't very likable. That's how I got into this work. And I had no friends at work. And people, thought I was on an agenda, all of that. Since that time, I've built an entire company. We've graduated thousands of adults through emotional intelligence training. That same boss has actually become my best friend. And so has gone through this training as well. And so it's really amazing. Once you change that little story that you continue to tell yourself, everything around you changes.
Yeah. Your world changes. And you talk about that in the beginning of the book, when you talk about Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And you talk about when we decide to start making these changes, we have this force that's moving, propelling us to want to make these changes. But then there's the other side of things where the world, it's almost like the world pushes back with an equal force, right? Which can make it feel like, oh, this is so hard, I can't do it. Or all these obstacles come up that make it feel like, well, what's the point? Why bother with this kind of stuff? But in my experience and what I've been through is when those things come up and I get some pushback, I know I'm on the right path, and I've just got to be willing to tell myself different stories so I can move past that and get get past those things happening. So can you talk a little bit more about this and maybe how that's shown up in your lives?
Yeah, we actually celebrate the pushback, because it is.
We call it our big yes moment.
It's equal and opposite. But if you make a big change in your life has been set up to hold you in stasis. It's kind of like you have a bunch of attachments all around you that hold you in place right here. And then when you decide to move, all of those things, let's say they're rubber bands or whatever, all those things are going to give you resistance to that. Yeah. And so the bigger your change, the bigger that equal and opposite reaction is. So when it shows up, we go, yes, that must have been a big change, because boy, look at how it's showing up. Instead of saying, oh my God, this is so hard, we celebrate the resistance and say, oh, that's just the universe saying, do you really want to do this? Are you really serious about this? Well, handle that, And so it's a way to reframe how what we experience as resistance, shows up to us. We see it now as something that's affirming our change because of the opposite reaction.
And I can give an example of this. So my husband and I are about to adopt a child. And we've been, talking about it for years. We've been doing social worker interviews for months. And right before we went on we're on a trip right now. And right before we went on this trip, the social worker said, you're approved. So that means like you could be taking a child home by Christmas. Wow. And as soon as that happened, both of us like pulled back. We were like, oh, and then, it seems like people just came out of the woodwork to say, but your family's so great as it is. Are you sure you really want to do this? What if things go south? And like, I call it considerations, right? So all these considerations started showing up, popping up, all like little whispering in my ear. And then I had a real honest conversation with my husband. And I said, this is our test. And, and what we decided is we're going to use this fear as fuel. So rather than use the fear to stop us from making forward motion, that this fear is exactly why we should be moving forward.
We actually did the same thing when we got married. My wife and I got married with no intention of having kids. I was previously married and had two grown-up daughters already, and we got married 30 years ago, and we just didn't intend to have any kids. And then we one time had a scare, and we said, all right, so let's imagine that we're going to have kids, and for the next month, go about telling everybody that we're going to have a child, and see how that feels,
Yeah.
and allow the equal and opposite reaction to mess with our minds and things like that. And we found that at the end of that, not only were we prepared better, but actually Sarah became pregnant.
Oh, wow.
And it sort of like manifested itself right out of that whole conversation. So, he's now 24 years old, and one of the many joys in my life. But going into it without hesitation, because we had already gone through the trial, like you were talking about, Candace, of like just wearing it, putting it on as a suit coat and seeing if it fits for a while.
For sure. My boyfriend and I are going through that now too. We're talking about getting married. And I mean, and this is something that I've talked a lot about on the show, as I mentioned about my previous stories I had made up about myself. So I'm facing the same thing, and I'm kind of talking to a few friends about it. And it's like, what about this? How are you going to do that? Where are you going to do, and all this stuff. And I'm like, and I'm glad we're talking about this, because honestly, if there's one thing that everybody takes away from this interview, I hope that this lands with everyone. This, when you want change and you start to take the steps to make change, the resistance doesn't mean you should stop. And right. For many years, to me, that's how I interpreted the resistance, that I'm doing it wrong, I better stop. But as we're talking about right now, the resistance, that's normal. That's part of it. That's yes, we're moving forward. The
physical law.
And that's also the subtitle of the book, right? The only way out is through. And essentially right. what we like to say, Chris and I often say, what's in the way is the way. So if you're feeling pushback, then it's like, okay, I'm going in the right direction. Let's keep going. And I think so often our students and the people that we coach will say, oh yeah, you know what? I said I wasn't going to do this. And then suddenly, things happen, and it told me I made the right decision. And I was like, well, now you're just collecting evidence that you shouldn't move forward, rather than actually taking yourself on about what that is in resistance for you. Right. So I always warn readers and our students, like, be careful, because it's going to feel easy to stop. It's going to feel easy to give up. And then you'll collect evidence to say that was the right decision, when in reality, the resistance is actually the direction of growth.
Right.
Our minds are our worst enemy,
Oh, for sure. For sure.
And so we're always, trying to be aware of, where did that thought come from? Mm-hmm. Did it come from my history of being told that I can't? The three words that children learn most are no, don't, and stop. Mm-hmm. And so, we grow up with that belief. We grow up, science tells us that we learn 90% of our vocabulary before the age of 5 when we're little. So 90% of the words that describe our world around us were learned when we were little kids, when the world was bigger, faster, stronger, and smarter than we were. Right. And so we learned that we're just little nothings. And so we either have this belief, well, maybe I am nothing, or, oh yeah, I'll show you.
Right.
And both Candace and I are, oh yeah, I'll show you.
That's how I am too.
It's still coming from that same belief that I'm not enough.
Right.
So all of those thoughts that come out, when we have, as Candace says, are we just, collecting evidence around that? Are they collecting evidence to affirm that old belief, that 5-year-old belief that I'm not enough? I'm not bigger, faster, stronger, smarter. That's what the world is, Right. Or are they, collecting evidence of, oh yeah, watch this, and I'm just trying to fight the world, to prove to myself that I am enough, even though I still hold that belief of not enough. What we have to do is really eradicate the belief that I'm not enough.
Right.
I'm absolutely enough the way I am.
Right. And you talk in the book about how our perception is not reality, right? And I think you even say be skeptical of your beliefs.
Yeah.
And that simple statement right there. I've been going to a grief counselor after everything with my dad, because it was such, I'm still in shock. I think about it, but I talked with her about that, about being skeptical of our beliefs, because especially, and grief is different because you're just in an altered state when you're experiencing that. But I still found that it was so easy for me to pull myself down into these pits of despair and feel like almost like I was justified, or that I should stay there, or, all of these things that come up with that. But being skeptical of our beliefs and understanding that just because we perceive something in the way that we perceive it doesn't mean that it's actually true. I feel like I tell myself this almost every day. And it's like almost every day I'm still surprised that what I believe is not true. Even after all these years, I still feel that way because it's so strong within.
So you're talking about something that's really important, and that's the distinction between an authentic emotion,
Mm-hmm.
which is, the appropriate emotion when our father dies is grief.
Mm-hmm.
It hurts. It's a loss, and we feel that emptiness. We don't know what to do with the love that we had for that person now that that person's not there to receive that love. And so there's this hollow feeling, and we call it grief.
Right.
But then there's that despair that is the mind making up out of its own scarcity or whatever, that this is the way it's always going to be,
Yes.
or,
Yes.
and that's what despair is. There's no way out of this. And again, come back to the only way out is through it. You go through the grief, and you're never not going to get over the loss of your father. It's not something to be gotten over.
Right.
To be embraced.
It can be fixed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one thing too, something my husband tells me often is feelings aren't facts.
Right.
And anytime, so we lost a child last year, which Chris is very aware of. And so I first, my heart goes out to you for the pain that you've been feeling. And for so many of, I'm sure your listeners that have experienced the pain of loss. But the stories that we make up about our current life as a result of that are the parts that get confused. And so I was, at a point in grief last year where I was like, I should get divorced and all, like just basically bomb my whole world.
Yeah.
And my husband said, babe, your feelings aren't facts. So I invite you when you're feeling this way to just write down, what are the facts of your life?
Yeah.
And like, are those facts things that you think are positive or that are negative? And if the facts are positive or negative, then make a decision from that. And that really helped me when I get spun up in my stories.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry for your loss as well. I know the grief is, I've talked a lot about on it here. And it's actually something I didn't think I was going to be able to talk about. And that's what you're talking about in that state of despair where you feel like you're stuck there and I will never be able to move on. But then you start to, the only way out is through. Each day it gets a little better, and a little better. And then here we are being able to talk about it. And hopefully, the listeners are able to understand if they're going through things like this, because especially, and this goes back, I think, to what you talked about being alone. If you try to go through these kinds of things alone, what I found is you just get yourself further into the spiral of your own self and your own story, and you start to believe your own story even more. So getting help in some way, whatever that means for you, is, to me, has been, even through my whole journey, not just with my dad, but just, it's been such a monumental, acceleration for my growth, because I got out of my own head. I got somebody else gave me a different side of the story that I had never considered before.
Right.
And one thing that we talk about in the book is that we have a formula for a difficult conversation. And the reason I share this is because it's the path for getting unstuck. And the path for getting unstuck is to say, okay, what are my fears? Like, just be very clear on what you're afraid of. And what are my hopes? What would I like to come out of whatever this current situation is? And then you say it to someone. You actually get it out of your head. I talk about our heads are like a bad neighborhood. There's like a car fire happening and gang fights and everything else. But once you get it out of your head and you talk about it with someone else, it gives you perspective and you can actually get unstuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things that I really like talking about in terms of how transformation works is actually the brain science behind that. It's not just a matter of saying so or declaring or saying what my hopes are, and then magically they manifest. There's actually a part of your brain that's a very primitive survival piece of the brain. It's called the medulla oblongata. It's sorry to be a psycho